Hey, welcome. In today's video, we're going to look at UTXO, or Unspent Transaction Output. This is a core concept in understanding how Bitcoin transactions work. UTXO confuses many beginners to Bitcoin, and I'll say at the outset that thanks to the way today's wallets are designed, understanding UTXO is not as important as it once was, because there was a time when if you didn't manage these transactions properly and you didn't understand what UTXO is, you might actually spend Bitcoin that you weren't anticipating or meaning to send. So the wallets do take care of a lot of that for you today, but clearly it's still important to understand how UTXO works if you really want to understand how Bitcoin transactions work. And that's what we're going to look at today. So it's important to get the basics of what a Bitcoin transaction looks like. Each transaction has an input, that's where the money came from, and an output, and that's where the money is sent. So let's say Alice sends me 1 Bitcoin, and I turn around and I send that same Bitcoin to Bob. I have an input from Alice, and I have an output to Bob. This is actually the essence of the blockchain. You never have a balance in your account. The blockchain is just a series or a list of transactions that shows the money received and where the money went to. And the beauty of this is in this transaction that you see here on your screen, if you want to see if the Bitcoin that Bob received is in fact valid, we can see that Bob got it from me, and we can then look where that input was for my transaction, and we can see that I got that from Alice, and so forth. So we can follow the money trail to make sure that that is a valid trail of money or Bitcoin that finally makes its way to Bob. Now, let's use the same example where Alice sends me a Bitcoin, but I don't send it on to Bob. So I don't have a true output on my transaction yet. This is different to the earlier one where I immediately sent my Bitcoin to Bob. In this case, I'm holding on to that Bitcoin. Now this output is what's called an unspent transaction output. And the name makes a lot of sense, right? It is still an output, but it's unspent. Clearly, because I haven't sent it to Bob yet. It's available for me to still spend. So when you look at a transaction, you can see what is its unspent transaction output, meaning how much is available to spend. So this is now the important part to grasp about UTXO, is with every Bitcoin transaction, when I send money to somebody, I have to send the entire unspent transaction amount. I can't send a fraction of that unspent amount. So let's go with the example where I want to send a quarter Bitcoin on to Bob. It's not like a bank account where I simply send a quarter Bitcoin and I have 3/4 Bitcoin left in that transaction. I have to create a new transaction, and the entire unspent transaction output has to be spent. So what happens is that I have to basically create a transaction that sends a quarter Bitcoin to Bob, and a 3/4 Bitcoin, the remainder, back to myself. And that will then reflect as an input to a new transaction. So you do have to spend the entire amount, but what you aren't meaning to actually send on to the recipient, you effectively pay back to yourself, and that's what's called the change address. And it makes a lot of sense. It's almost the change that you're getting from the transaction. And so in this manner, the blockchain keeps maintaining this list of transactions, and every transaction is always fully spent, if you will, and it'll just lead to new transactions that have a new input to show where that money came from. So again, you can't just split money arbitrarily and keep the change. You have to explicitly create a transaction that not only pays the person you want to send to, but then pays you back the change. Now, the wallets that you use today will handle this for you automatically. So you just send, a quarter Bitcoin to Bob. The wallet's going to internally automatically create a change address and send that money back to you. In a different video, we'll look at any kind of security concerns or privacy concerns if you keep reusing the same address for the change address versus actually sending it to a new address, which is preferred and which most wallets will do for you. So that's the concept of unspent transaction output and change address, and I hope to see you in the next video. Thank you.